change the color and stuff. So I'm just going to select this item, okay, copy it, Command C, and then Command T tab for the Photoshop version, and just kind of take a look. I have this layer. I'll click on it so that the part I bring in as pixels, because I want to be able to edit this, and just go ahead and click OK. And now I have this part. And I brought the drawing in too so I can see where I can place that in there. So there's the image, and I just go ahead and click OK. And right now, just for starters, I can say, well, I want to take this part and clip it out of there. So depending on if it's overlapped, I'm going to keep this and just title it Ring, and go ahead and give it a layer mask above it. But below this, I'm just going to Command Shift. Now that part is selected, so I can take a brush, make it a little bit smaller, make sure it's a full 100%, and I can just erase that part, and you can see it's kind of gets the little ghosty image there. But that's the part that's going to be showing through that, depending on how far I take this. So that's the section. I just have to be a little careful on how much of this I take off. So I'm just going to come down to here and leave all that exposed and then deselect it. Okay. This part is kind of shown through, so if I reverse it, I can, if I took off too much, then at least I can drag that part in there. So now I have this section that kind of looks like a three-dimensional piece. I'll select back on that section to it, and now I can illustrate it or draw it or take a couple things off, hide the background so I don't see that anymore, and now I'm back to just a full-blown illustration where I can take the dodge and burn tool, which is pretty nice to use. Just remember that it's in the mid-tone ranges. Take the brush. I have it exposed at 50%, so I can darken some of this up. I can darken it right where it touches that piece and kind of manipulate it that way. I can change some of the coloring to this. You know, I can go to Image Adjust and go to Hue Saturation if I want to. Just make sure Colorize is highlighted, and that changes some of the coloring or the saturation of that color into that piece if I want to manipulate it that way. And the saturation just is the amount of color. So if this was actually, it is kind of a light colored piece, but I'm going to keep the values in there and click that in there. So now I have that item. And the same thing is now I have these two pieces. This is the top. And again, if you start to manipulate it, you can select these layers to duplicate just in case you go too far and you want to come back to it. But again, I can do the same thing where I want to dodge and burn this. I can lighten some of this up, increase the brush size, you know, so it's kind of lightening up that background. So it gives a little bit more. So the other way I was just kind of shading it. Now I'm just kind of using that part to illustrate it. Okay. I could also take the same part and put a cast shadow right above it, or I can just burn some of the tool in there. So default with the brush, make it a little bit smaller with the bracket key, and that's kind of doing that part. So depending on how far I stretch that out, again I can select that, inverse the selection to take the eraser if I want to, click on E for eraser, and just take that off of there. So now the cast shadow, I can just kind of minimize that down a bit. Okay, so that's kind of giving me the label, and then the entire thing I can give as a shadow. I just have to select this part, hold the Shift key down, select this thumbnail as well as this one, and now I have this entire piece, and I'll put it down below here, give it a new layer, and just Option delete it. So it's, you can't see it, it's behind everything. And now I can just drop this off here and free transform this. Now this is where the manipulation of this gets pretty important, being able to handle this part. So there it is, reflected. Again, I can go in and grab a color using a little bit of Option Shift Delete, fills it that way. The opacity dims it down, and then I can take the layer and use the gradient. So here's the gradient on this one, a bigger brush. Make sure I have the black set as the foreground color. Change the opacity down a little bit, and it lets me soften up some of that edge there. And then also with the blur tool kind of lets you soften the edge of that as well. Okay. So see how you do that? It's just kind of taking a three-dimensional pieces, combining them into one